It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the podcast of Let's Go Hockey, Pete Cameron. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Brandon. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk hockey with you and talk podcasting. This is good.
Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start a hockey podcast?
Yeah, I've been involved with hockey my whole life since I was a little kid, and after playing was done, I rolled into coaching, and I still do a lot of coaching, and as I was kind of growing my coaching brand and camps and clinics, elevated hockey. One of the pieces that I wanted to get into was podcasting. It was just kind of interesting to me, in that I was doing social media and video and real life camps and clinics, and a little bit of writing here and there. And then, the audio, the podcast piece was something that was new and challenging and kind of exciting. And, I'd been listening to a lot of hockey podcasts, and I had that idea to get out there and do that and have it a good way to just connect with other hockey fans and players and coaches and things like that. So I thought about it for a long time. I kind of made one effort a couple years ago to start it, and it didn't really pan out. I just didn't stick with it. I didn't go all in on it. And then when everything with COVID started happening and went into quarantine, in the kind of quarantine, and I ended up reaching out to a buddy of mine, Danny Heath, another hockey coach based in Minnesota. And he and I had thrown some ideas around, and I wanted to start this podcast. And then Danny said, "Hey, why don't I do it with you?" And so that we kind of went from there. The two of us started the show, started doing it, and then quickly realized that we needed a little help on the editing side. And we convinced our producer, Vinny, to get involved and make it sound like we know what we're doing.
Can you talk about how you came up with the name Let's Go Hockey?
Yeah, so Let's Go Hockey podcast. We played with a lot of different names, and like my company outside of the podcast is called Elevated Hockey, and that's kind of where I spend most of my time and efforts in the hockey world. And then Danny, the other co-host, he has a company called Project Hockey. And so we were trying to come up with a new name, something, that wasn't just Elevated and wasn't just Project Hockey. And we played with a lot of different names, but what we came back to was Let's Go, because one, just kind of that saying "Let's go" is just it's across a lot of different sports. It kind of shows excitement and enthusiasm, but it's pretty ingrained into the hockey culture, where it's just kind of common vocabulary in the locker rooms, with the rinks, and with the hockey players we work with. And Danny in particular, that was saying "Let's go" is a big piece of his his vocabulary, and it was kind of a regular, when we were trying to figure this out, whenever Danny was getting excited, he would just be like, "Let's go, let's go." And, so eventually I kind of landed on that one night, was just thinking, like, we were just racking our brains, couldn't get a good name. And all of a sudden I was like, what if we just did the Let's Go Hockey podcast? And it just kind of stuck, and it was different. And, I think it portrays a little bit of, excitement and enthusiasm and just passion for the game. So we ran with it.
When it comes to your podcast, do you mainly talk about NHL, or do you talk about the NWHL and college hockey too?
We we speak about all levels, or we try to, at least. We don't have a particular focus on the level. We more focus on sharing the people that we're interviewing. We try to get share their experiences within the game, whatever levels and whatever path they had in the game, and then also their advice to current players or hockey parents or coaches. So we're kind of a player and coach focused podcast. So with that, most of our guests we have a lot of junior hockey coaches from various levels. We have professional players from the NHL, AHL, ECHL. We've had some college coaches. We've had some Olympians. We've had a couple women's professional players. We've had some strength and conditioning coaches. So we kind of try to we don't have a singular focus on what level we talk about. We just talk about how to like share experience and advice and improve the game of hockey for the people that are listening.
Who are some of the people that you have interviewed?
We've been pretty fortunate in that I think we're a little over 50 episodes now. We've been pretty fortunate with the people we've interviewed. And so a couple of my favorites, we've had a couple pretty prominent NHL players that we've spoken with. Patrick Marlow is a pretty legendary NHL player, and we were fortunate to interview him. And a buddy of mine, Peter Budaj, was a great interview. He's a longtime NHL goalie and three-time Olympian. Marty Pavlich a lot of people don't know that name, but that was probably my favorite interview. He's a little over 90 years old, won 4 Stanley Cups with the Detroit Red Wings. And we talked about what the NHL was like back in the 50s. And we've also had like David Carl was a great interview. He's the head coach of Denver University. We've had a few other prominent NHL players, a few other, Maddie Rooney was a really cool interview. She's the starting goalie for Team USA when they won gold in the last Olympics. So we've been pretty fortunate that we've had a good list of guests and from like a lot of different levels. And it's I'm hoping to keep rolling and keep getting some good folks on the show.
When it comes to the NWHL side, who have you interviewed? I know that you've interviewed people like Maggie Rooney from the Connecticut Whales.
Yeah, so I think so Maggie was a recent interview. Like you said, plays for the Whales there. We also, like I mentioned, Maddie Rooney, I believe, plays in that league, maybe or did, or I'm not 100% sure if she is this coming season or not. But as far as like women's hockey, Maggie Rooney is the most recent. We've interviewed Maddie Rooney, who's the goalie for the U.S. Olympic team, and Lindsay Fry, who also is a U.S. Olympian who's doing big things in the game of hockey right now. Especially works for the Arizona Coyotes, but then also is growing girls hockey, specifically in the western part of the U.S., but also in the just across the country. So,
how do you go about getting some of the people that you've had on your show?
Between the majority of them, between myself, my co-host Danny, and our producer Vinny, we have all three of us work in the game of hockey, so we have a decent network of people. So a lot of the people are either already our contacts or are like friends of friends kind of thing. Every now and then we'll just randomly reach out to somebody if there's somebody of interest that we really want to connect with and talk with, and just kind of go from there. And some people say yes, some people say no, but the majority of the people we're kind of already connected with. And then from there we branch out from our network and then maybe hit people up on social media if we don't know them personally. We've had some success with that a little bit.
What is something that you learned now that you didn't know before starting a podcast?
I learned very quickly that I am not good at editing podcasts, which is where Vinny comes in. So that was a big learning curve for me. And I was, looking back, I would have probably had him from the very start, because he works his magic with all the advertisers and editing and intro and outro. I also, the other thing I've learned is that it's really hard to stay consistent, but staying consistent on the scheduling of interviews and releases and everything is what makes the wheel spin. So I think those are the two big learning pieces, is that getting somebody to help with the audio, where it's just a weakness of mine, that was a big part. And then trying to make sure that we're consistently interviewing people and scheduling interviews and a little bit ahead. It was a big learning piece for us too.
What are some of your future plans for your hockey podcast, Let's Go Hockey?
Yeah, so for Let's Go Hockey podcast, we're looking at continuing to release episodes with coaches and players and people within the game of hockey. So we're going to keep going strong with that. We would like at some point, we have an idea of doing some live shows. So we would be like on site at certain hockey events to then record a few, kind of make an event out of the recording. So, in I don't know if that's going to happen this season, but I think maybe hopefully by 2022, we'll be able to travel and get in front of people face to face and record some of these events, or record the episodes at events like the NHL All-Star Game or Stanley Cup playoffs or NCAA Frozen Four, or like the Minnesota State High School Championship or the USHL Frosty Cup or things like that. Some significant events in the game of hockey. And then my dream is to somehow get involved with some of the overseas world championships as well with the podcast and record some of the international players during the tournaments.
When it comes to some of the interviews, do you mainly try to focus on coaches and players, or have you gone the executive route too?
The vast majority of our focus up to this point has been on players and coaches. But, we behind the scenes have been talking a lot about building like a whole nother kind of category of interviews where it's people making a living in hockey, which would be like beyond players and coaches. So it'd be kind of like builders of the game or executives in the game. So like whether it's a general manager of a team or an owner of a team or scouts or people that own, within hockey brands like equipment manufacturing companies or media specific outlets. So, there's a whole nother piece that we're playing with of growing beyond just players and coaches and going into, simply put, I guess, people that make a living in hockey that aren't playing or coaching.
What are some of the different segments that you have on your podcast?
So we after the intro, we kind of talk in the intro, we kind of talk about what we're excited about, what our big takeaways from the interview were. And then we just dive right into the conversation, and every conversation is a little different. We just kind of take it wherever it might go. And then that's kind of the main piece. But then at the end, we do 3 stars of the night. And so Danny and I will pick kind of our 3 big takeaways from that episode. And those are our top 3 stars of the night, just like in an NHL game or NWHL game, the 3 stars of the night, the 3 best players of the night. We do that for the top 3 takeaways for us that we enjoyed from that interview, or that we think were like very important, significant pieces of information from that interview.
What advice would you have future people looking to start their own hockey podcasts?
My biggest piece of advice would just to jump in and do it. I think looking back, I contemplated and thought about doing the podcast for almost 2 years before I actually pulled the trigger and did it. And I kind of like over planned it and just thought about all these different things I could do. And so my biggest, when I actually pulled the trigger and started doing it, it just kind of started flowing and growing and I really enjoy it, and I still do. So my biggest piece of advice, I guess, for people that are interested in starting their own podcast is just to get out there and do it. Like, get yourself a mic, figure it out, look through some of the tutorials, and just start doing it. And the more you do it, the more you're going to figure out the details of it and start stringing things together and keep growing.
Where can my listeners find you at on social media and podcast platforms?
Yeah, on social media, Instagram is our biggest. So my personal one is at Elevated Hockey, and the podcast is at Let's Go Hockey Podcast. And so you can reach either of us, myself or the show, through that. Danny, our co-host, is at Danny_hype. And for the, if anybody wants to listen to the podcast, it's, it's available on iTunes, like Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Thank you again for your interview, Pete, and best of luck in your future with Let's Go Hockey Podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it. Fun talking with you, man. And best of luck with Brandon Sports Talk. I appreciate having me on.
Thank you. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Pete, for your interview, and best of luck.
Thank you, Brandon. Have a good one.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.